you do fail a lot more times than you succeed. And that is
Yeah.
something which you've got to learn very, very early on in your cricketing career. And actually, I suppose in that vein, Ethan, what would you say has been the toughest moment? What would you say has really been the lowest moment from your time at Middlesex so far, maybe from a playing perspective or a personal perspective at the club? Has there been a moment which has, I don't know, almost taken you aback really from county cricket at some point?
Yeah, in that kind of in the summer of 2020, I mean, there's been some difficult moments when I haven't bowled particularly well in games, whatever. But I think you have to, you have to learn to deal with that, as you say. I think in the summer of 2020, just off the back of that initial lockdown, we played a pre-season game at Northampton, and I, for a number of reasons, had got myself in not a very good state to play cricket, and I think uh, mentally, physically, skills wise, whatever. It should have been a period after this kind of lockdown and isolation where you could go out and really express and enjoy, and everything should be there. And it just felt so far from that, and I was so far off the pace. And fortunately, I was supported incredibly well over the next few months by people, but that was a time definitely when I questioned whether cricket was something that I would enjoy again, and whether it was something in fact, I would be able to do as a job in terms of a literal ability, kind of, whether I would be able to compete at that level, because I was a long way off the pace and a long way off where I needed to be, as I say, physically and mentally, to kind of to perform at all, or even just be around that. And I was turning up to cricket grounds and just begging it to be 6 o'clock or whatever and go home, really. So I feel very fortunate to not be in that space anymore. But that was, yeah, definitely the lowest the lowest moment, I think.
Well, Ethan, if you don't mind me asking, really, how did you get yourself out of that rut, I suppose? Because that sounds horrible. Obviously, as a cricket fan and as someone who plays cricket, I mean,
Yeah.
you do have those moments where you question yourself when it comes to this game. And I imagine on a professional level, that's increased by tenfold, if not a hundredfold, in comparison to village cricket. But we do sit in village cricket as well. Some people just go, the love's gone. I'm not going to play
Yeah.
anymore. How did you get yourself out of that frame of mind and almost reinvigorate your cricket career from that moment?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that I didn't really. Um, I was alerted. Well, I was supported by a number of people incredibly well, and without them, I certainly wouldn't have been able to, because they actually, and one in particular, opened my eyes to something that was very obvious, but I couldn't see, if that makes sense.
And what was that?
That was a combination of kind of, and I'm aware people have really serious issues with this. I don't want to kind of trivialize it in any way, but it was a combination of overtraining, undereating, overstressing, not being able to relax, and not finding any way of allowing my body or my mind to kind of switch off. And I was basically just, I was about 12.5 kilos lighter than I had been at the start of the lockdown. I felt I was eating enough and everything should have been there, because I was training so hard and I was doing all this stuff. And I thought I was working harder than anyone else and doing all this thing. And it was just really detrimental. And I think, as I say, people do have really serious issues with this, and I want to respect that. But I suffered some kind of a burnout, I suppose you would say. Like I ran out of mental and physical capacity really to do anything. And it was actually Alan Coleman who I'd known as academy director through, and was a bowling coach, who after that Northants game kind of sat me down and said, like, what's going on? And it basically all came out there, and I couldn't be more thankful to him, to my family, and a few of the lads, particularly in Middlesex, who are so supportive. And they really enabled me to see that actually, like, there was something to go towards. And I worried that I definitely wouldn't get that same, like, I wasn't getting nervous before games. I wasn't like waking up excited or nervous, because I just didn't. It was kind of apathy, and a fear really of what might go wrong. And when I got feeling those nerves again in like the pre-season of last year, I was so grateful because I really worried that that wouldn't come back. So no, I'm incredibly, yeah, I would say people helped me through it. And then, once you start to see a little bit of evidence at the start of that journey, you then think, oh, like maybe it's not that far away, like with a few more steps. And I think I was lucky the time it came right at the end of that season. I played one game in that 2020 season, but I was better than I was in that Northlands game, but wasn't up to it. But that was the end of the year. So I then had 6 months really. And we broke it down and kind of worked through it. And it's an ongoing process in some ways. And with some of the things, around the food and the training, that's, I think, something that is part of my personality and I need to manage constantly. But I feel more equipped and, as I say, very well supported to, try and get there. So, no, I'm very, sorry, I know it's got very deep. I have a tendency to do that. But, that was kind of the path.
To be honest, Ethan, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's why I asked the question. That's why I asked the follow-up question as well, because I'm really interested by this, of course. We do delve into the psychological aspects of the game. It's a massive part, massive part. And I did actually read an article about that. I think it was for the Evening Standard, wasn't it? If I'm not mistaken, you did an interview with them a while back. And I was very, very interested to learn that. Was that chat with Adam Coleman the catalyst then, in terms of breaking that vicious cycle? Of course, it's not gone completely, as you mentioned right there. It's ongoing even up until this date. But was that the real Kickstarter in terms of getting you back onto that right path, per se?
I think it was, because I think up until that point, I know that the only way I can describe it is like having like a cloak pulled off you. I kind of knew in one half of my brain that all these things I was doing were not, were to my detriment. And then the other half, I knew the right stuff to do because I'm interested in nutrition, I'm interested in training, that kind of stuff. So I was kind of informed that what I was doing was ill-informed. But I thought I was getting away with it and actually the approach Coley took really did open my eyes, as you say, to that. And it was kind of the realization that, like, if you keep doing this, you won't be able to play county cricket. You won't be able to be a cricketer. You may have like 5% body fat and you may be able to run for like ages and ages, but when you're sitting on your bed and you don't have a job or you can't play cricket, you're probably not going to be so interested in that. And that was, I suppose that was the catalyst, actually. That's the best way of describing it. And then I think I spoke to my mum, my brother, and they had been concerned, but maybe not quite aware of the depth that it went kind of psychologically. And they were just phenomenal in the support they gave me. So, but I think it stemmed from there. And I'm very grateful that I was at a club that cared about me enough to put resources into that. So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ethan. First of all, thank you for sharing that, of course. I mean, I appreciate that again, because I wanted to learn more about it. It's a very, very interesting part of the game, and it's one that we do need to speak more openly about as well. That's something which I do think is very important. I mean, we'll talk about opening up cricket in due course as well, the work that you've done with them in terms of the Heads in the Game series, but it is important to note this as well, because this might actually help someone who's in a similar situation. So I really do appreciate that, Ethan. I sincerely do.
I think sometimes I feel we're in a big kind of culture of oversharing sometimes, and I think maybe whether, should I talk openly about it, and because I don't want it to come across the kind of, and when I spoke to Will for the Evening Standard in the summer, I didn't want it to come across a kind of like some kind of martyr, like phoenix from the fire, like, oh, look at what I've been through, because it's really not that. I think you actually articulated nicely. I think a lot of people have things that they have to cope with, and they may be more severe or less severe, they may be in different areas, but professional sport is high pressure, and it seems to cause a lot of, either it brings out certain personality traits or it kind of sparks things in other areas of your life. I think that can be difficult for people. And I think a lot of people experience those to a greater or lesser extent. And I think creating an environment where it's not to say you have to tell everyone all the time. And some people won't be comfortable with sharing to a degree that I might be, for example. But just, I think creating an environment where dialogue is possible, even if it's not always the option that's taken, is important. And reading Dustin Melton, I know we mentioned it before we started recording, Dustin Melton's article, and that was, a hugely brave thing to do, to step out and speak so openly about that, and it will help people. As I said, it's not the path that everyone would choose to take, and that's fine, but it may help some people. I think that's important. So, yeah.
It most certainly is. And yeah, that article from Dustin was one of our first ever guests. We're talking
right.
when we were in the single digits. As you can tell, we've interviewed a lot of counter cricketers, to be honest, Ethan. But
Yeah.
when I read that, I'm going to be honest, that was absolutely heartbreaking for me, because I've been speaking to Dustin for a while now. I've been speaking to him since 2020. And even though we've been speaking relatively frequently, even I didn't know it's to that extent. I'm going to be completely honest, the amount of stuff that he's gone through in the last 12 to 18 months is staggering. And again, he's got such mental fortitude, such grit. He's a fantastic character as well, good seam bowler. Wishing him all the best for Derbyshire this season. But for him to come out so openly again, I think it is very, very brave, first and foremost, and courageous. But also in the long run, it's also helpful. And it's almost, again, we alluded to that theme earlier about breaking down the perceptions of professional sports people. I think it helps that. And it makes you realise that, again, there is that human element. Someone who's done this fantastically is Tyson Fury, in my personal opinion. The guy is the heavyweight champion of the world. He was outstanding against Deontay Wilder, and yet he's had some very, very well-charted issues with his mental health. And yet he's been so open. He's been so frank. He's had some great conversations, one which, to be honest, I'd highly recommend for those interested in psychology in particular. But for someone, the heavyweight champion of the world, and you think of all of the, not the stereotypes, but the perceptions of that title, and yet he's absolutely broken them. And behind it, you realise that there's a normal bloke, and even he, one of the most strongest, one of the most, well, I'll say physically fit, he is up there as well, and one of the most skilled fighters in the world, also has vulnerability. And I think from time to time, it's important for sports people to show that to some extent, obviously, to which they're comfortable.
No, I agree. I was actually just listening while I was making dinner to a podcast. Paddy Upton started this new series, which I've really enjoyed so far, and this with Chandler Close, the swimmer.
Butterfly.
Yeah, exactly. And he actually on the podcast gives an exclusive into some of the things that he's dealt with. And I think, right, everyone has mental health, and hopefully most people's is really good a lot of the time. But if it's not, then sometimes for some people, talking about it can really help. And seeing, like with anything, seeing role models was one of the big things that helped me. Was actually when I started speaking to someone, which was through the PCA and the support that they'd offered. And I say that because I think it's important. That was vital for me. So I just wanted to give them a shout out. When she said to me, it's like, this is not the first time I've seen this. You're not alone in the widest sense of the word. That actually gave me, like other people have been through this and come through it. And I think if you can see people, sometimes role models, then, or whatever you want to call them, then yeah, that can be really helpful.
100%. And to be honest, Ethan, thank you for all of this. I mean, again, this is really interesting for me, and I hope for some people out there as well, it's also helpful. It's also assisting you. 100%, because this is a massive part of the game with cricket, and this is so cliche, and I understand that, and there'll be people rolling their eyes as I divulge into this sentence, but it is so mentally driven. It's 90% mental and 10% physical, because you can have the absolute best technique in the world. You can be the best batter, best bowler, best fielder, whatever. If your head isn't in the right space, you're not going to perform to the best of your ability. And that is so, so important. So yes, we did get a little bit profound. We did get a little bit philosophical, which I expected from a theology student, to be
Oh,
honest, Ethan. I had to bring that up.
don't read too much into that.
I had to bring it up at some point, though, in our background research. But I appreciate that. And as I said, hopefully for the listeners out there, that will prove to be very, very helpful indeed.